morning, future homeowners. Welcome to yourrealestateacademy.com, where you will discover everything you ever wanted to know about real estate but were afraid to ask. This is the place to discover and ask all those questions. I'm so glad that you're here with me today because I think this is going to be one of my favorite um, seminars because it's called Dimes to Riches. This is about starting with nothing and building up to wealth for your family. My name is Debbie McGrann, and I'm a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker Realty. I'm also the team leader of the Reap Advantage team, and we can service your real estate needs in all 50 states. So no matter where you are, we can help you, and we would be honored to help you. Now, my purpose is to teach you the home buying process in simple step-by-step lessons so you can gain confidence and be assured that you're making the right decision and to know why you're buying a home for your family. So on our website, we go over all those things. Now, today, our story is called Dimes to Riches. This is a story of my family, my mother and father in particular. Now, my grandmother, my mother's mother, always told us, buy a home, buy a home, buy a home, own your own home. And this was way back when 1950, when she was telling my mother this. And my mother and father grew up in poverty, extreme poverty. But poverty can be the perfect teacher for people who want to be wealthy. Poverty teaches you what you don't want. You don't want your life to look like where it is. My parents learned early in life what they didn't want their future to look like. They both came from extreme poverty. They did not want to stay there and they did not want to return. So that was the motivation. However, they also learned that in most cases, poverty is not fatal. If you're in poverty today or you're not where you want to be financially today, you can change that with hard work and investing, and you can change it. That's the freedom of this country. That's why they say home ownership is the American dream, because you can buy a home when you're ready. When they were children living in poverty, there was no welfare, there was no food stamps, there was no free lunches. In fact, my mother had a very serious accident when she was 3, and she had extensive injuries, multiple. She fell 3 stories onto concrete, face down. That my grandmother took her to 2 hospitals that would not admit them because they didn't have insurance and they didn't have any way to pay. Can you imagine? Your baby is broken in the backseat of your car and the hospitals turn you away. They finally got to see the 3rd hospital. And the 3rd hospital told them, bring her in. She won't last the night anyway. But she did. She did. She was tough. So they didn't have social programs that we have available today that families have that are struggling with poverty. They grew up in rented homes with no heat, no electricity, and in my mother's case, no indoor plumbing. This is hard to believe, but my mother grew up in Washington, D.C. in the 40s, and she didn't have indoor plumbing until she was 12 years old. That's how she fell. They were on the 3rd story of a tenement apartment building, and she went to go to the outhouse, and she fell 3 stories. These were tough lessons to learn, but they learned these lessons well, and they used them to motivate them for their successful future. You have control over your future. You know, when we're children and we don't have any control over the situation that we live in. However, when we get on our own, we're 18, we go to get our first job or whatever. Now we can decide, how are we going to live? And we have to make important choices, and we have to make the right choices in order to have a successful future for us and our future families. One of those important choices is home ownership. Do you want to rent or do you want to buy? Do you want to make your landlord rich or do you want to make your family rich? So that's the first decision. I think my parents married as teenagers in order to escape their difficult family situation. I think they thought that if they worked together, they could manage their situation better. They could. I often wonder if they had a plan or did they have goals? I don't think they did, but maybe they didn't even know it, or I don't know because they were so very young. I suspect they had no plan and they just said, let's go for it. They figured, hey, what do they have to lose? They're leaving behind poverty. How much worse can it go, right? They had experienced the Great Depression. They had experienced, my mother had experienced the devastation of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. Now, if you read up on that, that was devastating. And the poverty was something we can't even imagine today. It was not only impoverished, it was dangerous. So that's why they left Oklahoma and came to Washington, is because everything was destroyed in Oklahoma during the dust storms. And they survived war. They were children during World War II in Washington, D.C. And again, I said my mother had that accident, so that was always part of her makeup. She survived that accident. So I think that made her very, very tenacious. She was a tough cookie. And it gave them courage. Surviving those things gave them courage to start out on their own at a young age. Now, they married in 1952. My brother was born in 1953, and I was born in 1954. So my sister was born in 1964 when their financial situation was a whole lot better. So my grandmother told them, own your own home, you have to own your own home. Well, how were these two kids, so young, with two kids of their own, going to own their own home? Well, I do know that my mother had a plan for this and she had a goal because we are told this story over and over. She had a plan to start her down payment for her house with a dime. She was going to save dimes. She put a jar on her bureau. And when my father came home from work every day, he worked 3 jobs because he was uneducated because he was young. He had that jar. He would empty out his pockets of all his change and put it in that jar. She started it with a dime. She started with a dime that she had in her pocketbook. So they kept it visible. They kept it visible right on the bureau. So they saw it every day. And she shared her plan of saving that money with my grandmother. I'm sure that my grandmother contributed every change that she had too. But just think about it. This is just emptying change out of your pocket. It's not a grand goal. I just love the fact that it was started with a dime. It's just a great lesson. Shortly, and I don't know how long it took her, she had $1,500 in dimes. Now, my dad told me that $1,500 went for the down payment on the house they were living in. Tiny, tiny little house. 2 bedrooms. I do remember the house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, but it had indoor plumbing, which to them was great. See, it's kind of like where you came from. What's your goal? Hey, indoor plumbing. So the house cost $5,000. So $1,500 was 30% down. We don't have to do that now. We can buy a house with no money down almost. But we still have to save money for other expenses. So that was a tough goal, but she did it. And she used to always say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And there were no excuses in our household. You just had the tough. From what they came from, there was no excuses for us. But their next goal was to buy a rental property. So what they did was the house they lived in, they moved to a bigger house. This is all in the same neighborhood. And these are very, very small, modest houses right outside of Washington, D.C. They bought the house next door and they rented the house that they left. Now, how did they buy one house, go from one house to the other house? Well, as we've learned in the other classes, or maybe we haven't gotten to that, you'll learn equity. They took the equity from the house they purchased, the first house, put it into the second house, kept the first house, and rented it out. Now, they would repeat that over the years in that same little neighborhood. So they had two rental properties, and the house that we lived in as a family, which again was tiny, tiny, tiny. But they were very modest. So they had those two houses and their own house that they lived in. They weren't even 30 yet. They weren't even 30 years old. So they were like on the fast track. But they started with a dime and a goal of home ownership, the American dream. They started with the American dream that we all have of the freedom of owning your own home. So I grew up learning about real estate since I was a child. I would go with my father when he collected the rents. I would help him paint. I'm a good painter. I know how to paint. When he had to do minor maintenance around the rental properties, he took me along. So I learned right there at his knee. I heard how he talked to the tenants. I heard how they talked to him. And sometimes their lack of respect, but that's another thing. But when my mother died suddenly at the age of 69, my mother and father had accumulated over $1 million in assets. At that point, they owned 20 houses. They owned 20 houses. They had moved to Florida and they bought 20 houses, and they bought very, very affordable houses so they could provide affordable rentals for people that needed a start, or maybe had some financial trouble. My father was a pushover landlord, but that was his goal, was to provide clean, safe, affordable housing for families that need it. And he did it for 20 families at a time. So, by the way, start saving your dimes, because $1,500 is enough to get you started on your homeowner plan. There are some loans out there that we can get for no down payment. And then you use your $1,500 for other things. Now, I want to give you a little visual here. This will help you in your goal. Everybody, when you have a goal, you want to keep it in front of you. And you want to share that goal with your family and friends. So we made this label for you. You can put it on a soda bottle, or you can put it on a cookie jar, whatever you want. We have a little hole in ours so we can put dimes in it. My granddaughter's now saving dimes because she saw this, so she thinks it's great. So this is dimes for your down payment. Keep this in front of you. Fill it with dimes. If you get this whole thing filled up, it's $700 in dimes. So put dimes in it, but throw some quarters in it. Put a $5 bill in it, $1 bill. Put some bigger money in it, and you'll get to your goal closer sooner. So if you go on our website, you can download this label and make your own visual aid and motivation that you can see it every single day. Share it with the kids. Share it with the family so they know what you're doing. Okay. The other thing that we have here, we have a great handout. It's called Dimes to Riches. Now, this comes from the Consumer Protection Agency. This is actually written, it's money management for teens, grades 7 to 12. But let me tell you, we all need this information. It's very basic, great information about budgeting, wants versus needs, opening a checking account, and it's really good. It's a back to basic brochure. So download this, download your label, and get started accumulating wealth. It's still possible. I can show you how to start accumulating wealth for your family with home ownership, because that's the best way you can do it. Homeowners have a 40 times greater net worth than renters. That is huge. That's why they call, and that's growing too. That's why they call it the American dream. You live in your house, you have to live somewhere. Are you going to rent or are you going to buy? If you want to get family wealth for your family, you need to buy. And I can help you with that. My family did it, starting with a dime, and so can yours. I'm happy to share this story with you because I think it's just so simple and so encouraging. So get those dimes started, throw a couple dollars in there, and let's get you that house.